Good morning. This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it's time for Avoid the Maze. You are special. This show has been created based on the Avoid the Maze show that I have done for the last 2 years with almost 300 episodes. However, we've changed it a little bit because the people I'm talking to, as far as I am concerned, they are extremely special. They have specialties that I mean, never have thought about. And when I read Jay's bio on podmatch.com, the first thing that came to light, he talks about behavior is the root of all success and failure. Now, I know I was taught as a young child to behave properly. Sometimes you don't speak, and sometimes you do, but you're very, very careful with your words. However, at my age now, looking back and listening to people out on the streets, we have a variety of behaviors. And for the most part, we are misunderstanding people and we're misunderstanding ourselves. So I'm going to ask Jay to take us on his journey, how he even got on this path, and what behavior intelligence really means. So take it away, Jay.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you for having me. I guess maybe a little bit about myself here. I am a behavioral scientist and I study psychology, neuroscience, and communication. The reality is I got into this field because I wanted to better understand myself. And I grew up in a local community that was kind of a blue collar area and grew up modest, very, very modest, and found myself being having a vision of being a professional hockey player. Now, nobody bothered to tell me that, and I know Cleveland's got a big hockey following and a lot of good things there. Actually, one of my clients, the Cleveland Junior Barons, are in that area.
But you have the
Um,
Red Wings. Come on. Nobody can compare to that.
we do have the Red Wings. Well, nobody bothered to tell me that I'm only 5'9.5". And hockey may not necessarily be the end all be all, but I really focused a lot of my energy and effort into that and building the discipline, the habits to be a very competitive player. So I played through the junior levels, I retired from that. And then at that point in time, I had taken a scholarship for competitive debate argumentation. So I got paid to argue with people, which I know there's a lot of people out there that would love that as a job.
Absolutely.
And I went from that to mixed martial arts, as I reflect on my younger years, I look back and I say, I was very much kind of full of aggression. I was full of very direct. One of my core values is bravery, is mastery, and independence. And I think that exuded all the way through my youth. As I got older and into business and into the business world, I realized that a lot of the behaviors that I had cultivated over the course of my time playing hockey, over the course of my time in mixed martial arts and debate, wouldn't particularly serve me well in building effective teams, in leading people, and essentially consulting even at the highest levels. So, research is often me search. And I started down the pathway of understanding what is it that drives my behavior on a daily basis. And as I started to unlock some of those different aspects, I realized there's a lot of people that are on that exact same journey. And they could be anywhere on a journey. They could be at the beginning, they could be in the middle. Um, I won't say the end because I think it's a constant journey throughout
Right.
life that we are always discovering different aspects of ourselves and humanity. But that was really what inspired me to study behavioral science was to better understand myself and why I do the things that I do. That,
You
yeah,
know, one of
go
the
ahead.
things I'm hearing from you is so evident what so many of us are going through that we're living in this very fast-paced world, and we're taking some of the knowledge that we learned when we were children and trying to apply that to now. And that really doesn't work. You're talking
Mhm.
about we have to learn how to evolve and be mindful. And
Yes.
so many of us don't take that time. If before I started doing this almost 13 years ago, if I would have sat there and asked myself, like, why am I doing this? And how do I feel? I would have been afraid to answer those questions. It took me a long time to finally say, there's a purpose. And if I don't voice it, then I'm not going to come across with any validity. And so I think that's what you're saying, that you had to go deep inside and almost tear your insides apart to figure out what you needed to do.
To a big part, and thankfully neuroscience now lets us kind of peek under the hood and better understand, the brain and how it operates and how it functions. But Karen, I'll even take it a step further, right? We're reaching into ourselves and to our childhood, to our experiences, to our traumas, to our successes. But it even goes farther than that. And one of my favorite behavioral scientists, neuroscientist, Dr. Robert Sapolsky, talks about how our history of human, so the evolution of the human species, going back, I think the earliest fossil evidence at this point in time is somewhere around 185,000 years ago, our species of, Homo sapiens.
Right.
When you look at the terrain that we lived in and you look at the conditions that our ancient ancestors were in, they had to essentially compete with a lot of different things, everything from weather. This is way before the iPhone, obviously, so they
Right.
couldn't just pull it up and Amazon something to their doorstep. They had to develop what is called, and this was actually coined by Dr. Paul Lawrence and Dr. Nitin Nouri of Harvard University, the four drives that essentially underlie all of our human decisions. And that's the drive to acquire. We needed to get resources, hunt and gather. The drive to defend. We had to protect ourselves from the elements, from warring tribes or anything else. The drive to learn, which we had to create tools, we had to better understand different aspects of that. And then also we had to bond. We have a drive to bond, to connect with other people, because alone we weren't going to make it. So Dr. Robert Sapolsky really does a nice job of putting together sort of an argument about why the conditions that we've survived and evolved isn't just our childhood, but it's actually our parents and our parents' parents, and it goes back generationally. And there's some pretty good evidence out there now that genetically we actually remember a lot from, and I'm not talking about like past lives and souls, and don't take any kind of stance on that, but genetically, our genes remember and express different aspects of our being on a daily basis. And Dr. Paul Lawrence and Dr. Nitin Noria really solidified that with the four drive framework.
So is that why there are some people, and I'm going to use my youngest son as one, that all of a sudden he will be doing something and it's like, how did I know how to do this? You didn't teach me how to do it, and then maybe through reflection, I'll say, well, your grandfather did that, but you didn't
Mhm.
even know your grandfather. And I will say there are a lot of things that my youngest son does that he replicates what my father-in-law did. And my father-in-law died, oh, 7 years before he was born.
Mhm.
So there's no way, other than the stories that we've told, but many of the stories we've told don't even reflect to that. So is that the genetic component that you're talking about?
Yeah, there's a concept of genetic memory, and I love that you share that, right? Like if you look at athletes, you see legacy athletes, you see legacy actors, actresses, you see legacy people going into the same field. Now, it's not universal, and here is what a lot of the neuroscience has actually helped us to better understand. I'll share this study because I think it's so fascinating. I think you'll love it, Karen.
Okay.
I'll try to be clear with it because it was a little complicated, but they basically took lab raised chimpanzees and wild chimpanzees. And what they wanted to understand was the genetic expression of fear. So they took these lab raised chimpanzees and exposed them to a natural predator, a threat, a snake. The lab raised chimpanzees did not react to it. They had absolutely no idea that they should fear this natural predator. So they bring in wild chimpanzees, expose the wild chimpanzees to the snake, and of course, they react in fear. So they say, okay, well, will the lab-raised chimpanzees learn this behavior in the event that they're in the same pen? So they do that. They put them in the same area. The wild chimpanzees react to the snake. The lab-raised chimpanzees see the reaction and then react in fear to the snake. When they separated them again, the lab-raised chimpanzees were exposed to the snake again, and fear stuck. Okay. But here's the really interesting thing that they did. They replicated the study, did it again. So they exposed the snake, no
Sure.
reaction from the lab, exposed the snake, the wild ones reacted. When they put them together, they used a clever two-way mirror system. The lab-raised chimpanzees saw flowers. The wild chimpanzees saw the snake. So when the wild chimpanzees reacted to the snake, the lab-raised ones reacted with fear to the flowers. Now, when they separated them again and they showed the flowers to the lab-raised chimpanzees, there was no reaction. This is what they came from that study. Genetically speaking, there is a memory inside of the chimpanzees that says snakes are a natural predator to us. Now, that was unlocked when the wild raised chimpanzees basically taught them, yes, you should fear this. There is no genetic memory of being afraid of flowers. So when they were together and the flowers were being visible by the lab-raised chimpanzees, they reacted in the same way that their wild did. But when they were removed from that, there was no genetic memory, so nothing continued to express. So we have a gene structure that goes back hundreds of thousands of years at this point in time. There's a lot of memory inside of those genes. Just because it doesn't express or it does express, that's a product of environment, nurture. So it kind of helps to understand the age-old question of, is it nurture or is it nature? Well, it's both. It's really both.
Interesting.
So it sounds to me like some of that genetic memory may be within your son. And as new opportunities come through, that expression may come forward.
How interesting. So, so many of us, we walk around with blinders on, and I know I did for the majority of my life. I just made the assumption if I was taught this once before and I never had a problem with it, I should just keep doing it over and over again. And when I started podcasting, I realized that there were so many behaviors that I've had in the past. And all of a sudden, I was opening up my eyes. They didn't suit me. Now, my fear was if I start tweaking them and changing them, who am I going to become?
Sure.
Am I going to recognize myself? So, how do you help people understand that, especially when they say, yeah, I know I need to make a change? And I go through this with my clients all the time. They'll call and tell me, you know, they'll have this boatload of things that they want to change about themselves. And I'll go, please throw that away. I'm going to start with one little thing why you
Smart.
think you need to change all those things. Um, but either we're willing to like jump in head first and change because your studies make sense, or we're so afraid to do that that we keep replicating the same mistakes over and over again. How do we help individuals
It's a
and
great
ourselves?
question, Karen. Yeah. So, behavior is a patterned response, and that patterned response comes from conditioning. And, in some cases, we think about the behaviors that we exhibit. And I love how you phrased it. Is this behavior serving me? Is this behavior actually helping me to achieve what I want to do, get to my goals, lose weight, get a new degree, get a different job, etc. If the behaviors aren't serving you, think of the behaviors as the output. Okay. When we're making changes or when we're trying to change ourselves, the behavior is essentially the output. Changing your core or changing, right? We can't change the hardware.
Right.
So, really, what we can do is just influence the way that the software operates. And that is what actually changes. So, your core, Generally your personality is considered to be fixed by the age of about 6 years old. Obviously, there's things like trauma or a global pandemic that can have some impact on it. But for the most part, you're going to remain you. Just because you tweak a behavior doesn't necessarily change that sort of essence of you. And I'm going to give you an example of this. So, one of my behaviors was to argue everything. And I think that came from the conditioning of my high drive to acquire, as well as being a debater. And it was fun, it's engaging to me. And I realized not everybody loves to argue. So, and, it was one of those things where it was like, okay, am I giving up a portion of my identity by shifting my behavior? Am I allowing myself to kind of lose my roots as a competitive debater if I decide that I'm not going to take up the arguments? And the answer to that ultimately is no. To help me overcome that, I had to recognize the pattern. What was my trigger that got me into these arguments? And what was the outcome? Well, the outcome was a friend, a partner, a spouse, whomever, walking away very frustrated and angry while I was like, oh, that was fun. That wasn't the outcome that I wanted to build those effective relationships. So I recognized, okay, I've got to interrupt this pattern. And recognizing where that trigger point was allowed me to do something very, very simple. And behavioral science is all about making changes that are small and simple that have a legacy and sustainable impact. So, exactly what you said. Let's start small. Let's understand the why before we even get into the how and the what. In this case, I understood the why. My how and what ultimately was I ask myself a question before I start to argue. I literally conditioned a response. Is this the hill that I want to die on? If I ask myself that question, 9 out of 10 times the answer is no. Now, there's sometimes that I'm like, you know what? I'm going all in on this one. But at the end of the day, this has massively improved my relationships from my 22-year-old self to my now 42-year-old self of better understanding or listening or engaging in a meaningful coaching way, as opposed to, well, here's why you're wrong, and here's my 17 subpoints, and here's all the evidence that backs that up. So that behavior wasn't serving my higher purpose.
And
Knowing what my higher purpose was, I want to be, I want to be a good leader. I want to be somebody that helps other people succeed and achieve. And in doing so, um, I needed to modify that behavior.
it's interesting because my behaviors, and I think everybody can recognize this, our behaviors change as we evolve. Sometimes we don't recognize they're changing. But when my youngest son was age 6, first grade, lots of friends, having a great time in school, we get a call from the school. We need you to take him out. He needs to be diagnosed. We believe he's autistic. Well, he's a very neurotypical child right now. But we took him to a doctor. Doctor goes through all the tests and says, okay, I'm going to label him Asperger's. Now, this is in the early 90s before
Hmm.
autism was, they were trying to identify it. And we brought him back to school. Now he has a label, and they determined how they were going to educate him going forward. And that's when my behavior started changing. Red light. Okay. What do I have to do? I have not just be his mother, I have to be his protector. I have to be his voice. I have to be an advocate. And I wasn't recognizing what I was allowing to come out of me. And what I mean by that is that I fell into a trap that my son was different. My husband and I now were different. And so we basically became isolated. Okay. Everything around us was fearful. So when you talk about that snake really would have sent me up the wall. But another parent looking at me, I always assumed, oh, you don't think I'm doing a good job with my son. It took until my son graduated college and started working that all of a sudden I had to look deep inside myself. What did I do? I don't like who I am right now. And so I had to start listening to myself. And I actually sat my son down and I said, I started apologizing for things I did over the last 15 years. And he looked at me, he goes, "Why are you apologizing? That's what you need to do. But I don't need that anymore." And he said, "But it's not about what I need. You need to do what you need." We developed and we still have a very close relationship because it's not about the label. It's not about making him happy or making him better or making myself better. It's about understanding myself. And that's why I started podcasting and coaching, is that we have to recognize the things that have hurt us. If I go back and look at those 15, 16 years of his life, I only remember being a very angry mom. Today, I can get angry and I can switch it off because I
Mhm.
realize, what am I really being angry about? If you would have told me this, that I could have done this years ago,
Might not have
actually,
believed you.
I'm not, yeah, I wouldn't have believed you. And that's what I say to my listeners and to the individuals who are going through coaching. You have to be committed to it. It has to be something that you want to do, but you also have to recognize there are certain things that you're not going to change. And I think that's what I'm hearing from you, that there's that long line of history behind us, all those genetics that are influencing us. And we may not be able to overcome those.
Yeah, Karen, and first of all, I can only imagine how challenging that time was in your life, and really appreciate how, you discuss this because it's something that I've seen friends go through, I've seen a number of colleagues go through, and it can be really devastating. Labels have meaning, and they can absolutely shift the way that we operate within the world. Even like in training people to shift their behaviors, one of the things is we have them relabel themselves. We have them, I identify as somebody who is, a couch potato. Okay, how are we going to relabel yourself into somebody that is an active, outgoing workout, exercise heavy type individual, and we have them relabel themselves because labels do have power. Um, in that instance, and now I'm not a clinical psychologist, and I don't even pretend to play one on TV. I do much more of the uh, organizational side of things, but in that instance, when a label comes down onto somebody and you as the parent, you have this feeling of responsibility, not only to protect and everything else, but more than likely, and this is what I've experienced with a couple of colleagues, one of my friends, and she's the most beautiful mother of an autistic child, and she blames herself. And it's just like, what did I do? How did I create the conditions of this? Was it because of this? And it was this perpetual sort of like self-loathing in
Right.
that space. And I see it and it breaks my heart because she's just an incredible mother. And when I had a conversation with her, I was just like, you have to forgive yourself. This is not something that you caused. This isn't something that you did. This isn't something that you have control over. I want you to ask yourself, what is this here to teach me? And when she started to do that, when she got those frustrating moments and started saying, what is this here to teach me? What is this here to teach me? It's here to teach me patience. It's here to teach me compassion, empathy, love. It really helped her to kind of navigate a new behavioral pathway. So if I was in that position, my reaction would probably be anger as well, to be perfectly honest with you. That's my natural
Right.
inclination. And in the 90s when they didn't have all that much support or all that much knowledge, and they were honestly taking guesses in a lot of
Right.
that space, respectfully, and I don't mean that. It was just medical science hadn't quite caught up at that point.
Right.
It is something of all of that uncertainty starts to build, and it's just like, I don't know. And we as human beings, this is our drive to defend. We don't like uncertainty. If If any of your listeners have ever gotten a call, I need you to come down to my office. I guarantee they weren't like, yes, I'm getting a raise. It's like, oh my God, what did I do? I'm in trouble. How did I do this? And our brain goes into that space and it starts releasing cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine. It's our survival mechanism. So it's not surprising, but I really love how you've been able to sort of navigate that and now are helping other people sort of navigate some of those internal challenges or internal belief structures. It's one of the first and most critical things that we can do is become aware and then understand why before we start to actually address the how and what of the output of behavior.
Well, and I liked your example about, getting the call, come down to my office. Okay.
Mhm.
It's like we're all in that position of we're tense. The shoe is going to drop. Okay. What is going to happen? And I was like that as a young kid. I mean, my father would walk into the house, and if he didn't have a smile on his face, I would start crying because I figured he was mad at me. And it
Mhm.
took me until my teenage years for him to sit me down and say, "You got to stop this. Do you realize that I have an hour drive to work? I'm at work for 8 hours. I have an hour drive home. I've been away for 10 hours. I'm tired. I need to just come in and sit and relax. And when you start crying, you get me angry, I yell, and then the evening is ruined." But I didn't see this as a kid. As a kid, I was conditioned to keep doing this. And I've kept that in the back of my mind that how important is our body language? Where is it coming from? Where are our fears coming from? And that's what I hope that my listeners are starting to understand is that life is not going to be perfect as much as you want it to be. And Jay, you and I could put out on Facebook about the beautiful day it is and that we're going to maybe go walking through the woods and we're going to enjoy nature and everything is beautiful. But it might be for that walk through nature. But when we come back to our offices and we have to deal with work, it's not as glorious. So we don't put that down on Facebook, but everybody will see us as, "Oh, look at these two people. They don't even know each other and they're walking in nature and everything is
Mhm.
wonderful. Why can't I find somebody to do that with?" And the reality of it is you can, but don't expect that to be 24/7.
It's sometimes negative emotions get a bad rap, and it's from that sort of negative framing of it that and they can be painful. But negative emotions really serve a higher purpose. What they are doing is actually indicating to us that something is amiss, whatever that might be. And one of the things you had mentioned it earlier, Karen, and I agree with 100%, is mindfulness, is being able to actually exist in a space of, okay, I'm experiencing some discomfort with this particular situation or this particular thing. Maybe that's causing or triggering some kind of anger emotion or a jealousy emotion or a frustration emotion, whatever those are. Let's sit with that for a minute. And instead of trying to push it away or distract ourselves by jumping onto our phone and looking at things, this is actually one of the most healthy things that people can do to create joy and happiness is to recognize there is no joy and happiness without the oppositional negative emotions. And, in order for us to experience something that brings true joy, we also need to understand what the opposition side of that is. Now, when we're thinking about sitting with an emotion, it can be very uncomfortable to do so. But in doing so and just sort of reflecting on it, saying, hey, I'm experiencing this. I'll just use jealousy as an example. That was
Sure.
something I was coaching on the other day. I'm experiencing this jealousy. Okay, well, where does that come from? Why am I experiencing this? Oh, it's because I truly love and care about the person that I'm experiencing this cause from? Okay, well, can we be grateful that we have this love, that we have this experience? Can we look at that and say, well, that's really positive that I have this relationship. Now let's sort of deconstruct where this negativity or where this is coming from. Have I had a conversation? Have I engaged in some kind of mediation of this? Have I explored this, or is it something that I'm just burying deep down inside me because I'm afraid to have a conversation? Because that's not going to make it go away. If we're
Right.
not talking it out, we're acting it out. So, this is one of those things where that exploration, that self-discovery is one of the first steps of being able to say, okay, I see this emotion. I'm having it right now. It's normal. It's human. Everybody else has this emotion at some point in time. Let's sit with it and see why. What is it? And really explore it. I mean, that's part of my role as a scientist, is to kind of dig into that of where did this come from and how is it manifesting?
It's interesting that you bring that up because my husband and I, we each have separate interests, but we've been married for 40 years. And for the 40 years,
Congratulations.
well,
That's
thank
amazing.
you.
You're welcome.
Um, if he wanted to go out taking pictures, I would go with him. If I wanted to do something on my end, he'd go with me. And this year, something changed. And it started really upsetting me. Um, every couple weeks on a Sunday afternoon, I see that he is a little agitated. He doesn't seem to know why. And then he'll say to me, I'm going for a ride. And the first time I said, can I go with you? And he goes, no, I'm going by myself. And bad memories came into my head.
Mhm.
My first marriage, I was cheated on. So I'm assuming, wow, we've been married 40 years. Okay, like he's going out and cheating on me. And I remember sitting that first day here in the studio, internally yelling at myself, why are you going there? You have no reason other than your past to think these thoughts. Couldn't stop thinking them. Right before he came home, he called and he said, do you want me to? And he was only gone maybe a little over an hour. He calls and he said, do you want me to pick up something for dinner? I was still so angry. And I said, just do whatever you want. He said, you're mad at me. My answer to him was yes. He did this again about 2 weeks later. And again, I went through the same thing. But this time when he came home, I said, explain to me what's going on. He said, music makes me happy. He said, I get in the car, I turn up the radio, and I just drive around. I listen to my music as loud as I want it. It changes my mood. And as long as I don't walk into an angry house, I'm going to be a good spouse. And I was like, this makes sense. In the hour that he's gone, sure, he could be having an affair with the neighbor next door. Who knows? But he's probably not. He's probably, after 40 years, this is what he's doing. And I finally had to say, thank you for talking to me about that, because that old knowledge in my head is making me think, what's going on? Yeah, 40 years is a long time. It can be wonderful, which it really is, or maybe it's falling apart. And when I said those words to him, he said, falling apart. I'm not allowed an hour by myself. And I realized for 40 plus years, he never took that time other than when he was working. So, to my listeners, those things in our brain that we've heard over and over again, or if we're watching a Netflix movie that is talking about cheating spouses, yeah, you're going to feel hurt. But from that hurt, I now feel so much better.
Yeah.
And if you would have told me that 20 years ago, I would have said you're crazy.
Well, and Karen, this goes back to that uncertainty question, right? Your brain, everybody's brain, the human brain doesn't like uncertainty. We have to fill in the gaps. We want to be able to explain sometimes the unexplainable. And when you experience some kind of shift in your environment or a shift in your world, that could be at work, this could be within your relationship, this could be even, my gosh, you're walking to your local coffee shop, and there's a big new building that's being erected there, right? It's change. So what does our brain try to do? It tries to fill in the gaps. Oh, well, maybe that's a new gas station. Oh, that satisfies my uncertainty. So I'm going to assume it's a new gas station until I'm proven otherwise. Trauma is one of those things where when we experience it, sometimes we think that we move beyond it, but the reality is it sits there in that background. And this is the brain's protection mechanism. This is what says, I don't want to be hurt again. I don't want to go through that experience again. So I need to guard myself and I need to prepare myself. And I'm not going to be that person that gets fooled again, right?
right?
So that's the script that was created in that background. Uncertainty happens, the script comes back out as a protection gesture, and then all of a sudden we find ourselves behaving in ways that are maybe not conducive to a positive outcome. And that's where it takes that moment. And I'm glad you did, on that second one to say, hey, listen, we've been together 40 years. I've not experienced this before. Can you help me better understand why or what purpose this is serving? And in the moment of that conversation, it kind of that new information, oh, you're taking an hour of self-care. You're doing this for yourself. It has nothing to do with me. It's really about you sort of regulating your own. Now the brain has new information. It subverts and replaces. Sure, that trauma may still every now and then kick up.
Sure.
And I've heard that explained. I've heard that explained by another coach as kind of like the shadow self, right? We all have a shadow self that sort of sits in there that tells us we're not good enough, that tells us that everybody hates us, that tells us, and it's that little voice, it's that nagging voice
Yep.
in the background. And it oftentimes, because we try to silence it or push it away rather than exploring it and saying, okay, what are you here to teach me? What should I be listening to? What conversation do I need to have? What behavior do I need to pull back on or engage in? It's when we become aware enough to actually take those steps to navigate our happiness, is that where we find happiness or we find solutions to whatever that uncertainty might be.
So, how can my listeners find you, follow you, learn more about, you know, the behavioral science? Because most of us don't think of it as a science. We just either call it good behavior or bad behavior. And as we're learning, sometimes they need to come together to create the behavior we need.
I love that you said that because that's actually something that I try to challenge. Good behavior versus bad behavior. It's all necessary. It's serving some kind of purpose. Identifying what the purpose is, then we can choose which behavior is actually more effective. So I love that you said that, Karen. You can find me. I'm very, very active on LinkedIn, and my handle is JAY Johnson CCG. So you can find me on LinkedIn. And then if your listeners would be interested, they can actually go to my website, behavioralelements.com, and they can take a free assessment to learn about their core drives, the drives that we talked about earlier. They can actually take it for free. It'll tell them what their primary element is. And the paid version actually gives you the measurements of all the levels and how each of those influence our decisions on a daily basis. But go check it out. I think that they would really enjoy that, and something that may help them on that pathway of self-discovery.
Wonderful. This will all be in the show notes. So for those of you listening, don't say, oh, I missed it. I mean, you can go back and rewind if you're streaming this, but you can just go to the show notes. All the links will be there. And Jay, I want to thank you for starting off my day in such a wonderful way. Now, it does help that it's sunny here in Northeast Ohio today after a week of rain and clouds. And I shouldn't be gloating over that because I know there's so many people in the Carolinas now who are devastated. But we have to find that silver lining. So thank you again, and we will be in touch. Have a
My
great day.
pleasure.
Bye bye
Thanks,
now.
Karen.